My name is Ludovico Alcorta. I am Director of Research, Statistics and Industrial Policy at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. UNIDO focuses on supporting developing countries in their industrialization processes. We work in two areas. We provide policy advice on the one hand, and we also provide technical cooperation to the developing countries. As to my background, I am an economist. I started my career in Peru, where I come from, and I've been working internationally, both in academia and international organizations and research institutions. And I've started working with UNIDO about 7 years ago as director in this branch, and my current activities involved four aspects. The first aspect is to compile all the industrial statistics worldwide. All countries report to UNIDO their industrial statistics, and we compile it and disseminate it. The second important activity has to do with the research, and UNIDO's research focuses on three aspects. Focuses first on structural change, and that is how the country's industry change as GDP per capita increases. Second aspect is how can we make industry more energy efficient and more resource efficient. That is, how can we green industry more. And thirdly, we focuses on value chain development. Third area where my branch works is also on the area of capacity building. We provide strategic and thematic capacity building on behalf of the organization. And finally, the fourth area where the branch focuses is on industrial policy advice. And here we try to work with developing countries in helping them to develop their own industrial policies and industrial strategies. The Industrial Development Report of 2016 focuses on the role of technology on achieving inclusive and sustainable industrial development. What we try to convey through that report is that achieving inclusive and sustainable industrialization requires that technology performs three functions. The first function is that it helps to sustain growth. The second function is that it helps to generate an inclusive society. And the third function is that it ensures that the industry that emerges and the development processes that come out of industrialization are environmentally sustainable. The report argues that it is possible for industrialization to be sustainable, inclusive, and sustained, but for that certain conditions need to be met. That is, in a nutshell, what the report conveys. Now, let me take the first condition, the condition of sustained growth. Another message of the Industrial Development Report is that in order to sustain growth, three aspects need to be met. First aspect is that we need growth is large average rates of growth. So growth has to be large and has to. In addition to that, growth also has to be non-volatile, which means is that the oscillations of the variance of growth has not to be very large, because that is not conducive to long-term sustained economic activity. And third, that the duration of these periods of growth has to be long, in the sense that we have to have economies growing for 3, 4, 5, 6 long periods of time for those economies to be to sustain economic activity in the long run. These economic conditions can only be met if first there's diversification into manufacturing and diversification into high-tech manufacturing. Secondly, this sustained growth can be met insofar as there is increasing investment in education and training. This sustained growth can also be met to the extent that there is an elaborate national innovation system where we have research organizations, companies, universities, service providers, all of which are working in favor of innovation. This sustained growth can also be achieved to the extent that we have significant foreign direct investment into countries which then find ways of making that foreign direct investment to spill over into other sectors. Another message of the IDR has to do with social inclusiveness. What do I mean by this? By social inclusiveness, I mean that industrialization has to generate employment, but at the same time it has to generate and facilitate the generation of equity. Inequality is not what industrialization should be about. Now, how does industrialization generate employment? Of course, by generating industry, by new jobs are created. But one has to distinguish that as companies invest in new technologies, and those technologies tend to be capital intensive, sometimes employment is not generated but lost. However, this is normally compensated by the generation of new industries through innovation, through technological change that helps to generate employment by shifting people from old industries into new industries. So that's one of the ways that technology and industrialization can help to generate employment. Another way that technology and industrialization can help to generate employment is by making that close connection between the endowment, the resource endowment of a country, and the types of jobs that are and types of economic activities that are generated. If a country has large availability of labor, then the kinds of technology that must be used by those countries have to be labor intensive. So there must be a match between the resource endowment and the technologies used in production, and that will help to generate employment. The other dimension, the other aspect of social inclusiveness that has to be considered is equality. And how does one achieve equality through industrialization? One achieves equality through industrialization by shifting economic activities from low-tech, labor-intensive industries to high-tech, knowledge-intensive industries. The more a country shifts its population to high-tech, capital-intensive, advanced knowledge-intensive industries, the more the society becomes more homogeneous, the more skills, the more work is based on skill and knowledge, and the more equal a society becomes. So that's another way that technology and industrialization can facilitate social inclusiveness. The third message of the IDR has to do with the environmental sustainability. Industrialization has to meet this third very important condition, that is that it must no longer pollute or damage the environment in ways that may have been done in the past. And now, what is required to achieve this condition? One first element here is to shift generate also high-tech industries, new industries, because new industries and high-tech industries tend to be less polluting than resource-intensive industries, for example. So by shifting resources away from all industries to new industries, one achieves what the report calls an environmental bonus, meaning that less pollution is generated. Another way that we can promote the environmental sustainability is by identifying industries that have high potential in terms of greening manufacturing. We have found out in this report that one of the industries with immense potential, not only in terms of environmental sustainability, but also in terms of social inclusiveness, because it generates employment, and in terms of its potential for long-term sustained economic growth, is the recycling industry. The recycling industry happens to is an emerging industry. It's an industry that is now growing very rapidly internationally, not only within countries, but in terms of trades of products to be recycled, and this is bringing immense benefit to the environment and in other ways too. Finally, another message that the Industrial Development Report brings is that in order to both achieve sustained growth, social inclusiveness, and environmental sustainability, there's the increasing need for international cooperation. International cooperation helps in many ways, but there are two very important ways that international cooperation helps. The first one is by sharing knowledge. And we can share knowledge about experiences of social development or equitable development that can be then taken to other realities and implemented in our realities. But we can also share knowledge about technological change in environmental areas, in green technology, that are so necessary, particularly in developing countries. Transfer of technology from advanced countries to developing countries in terms of environmentally friendly technologies will be critical in the future, and it's something that the report highlights. Other area of international cooperation is the funding of transfer of technology. Again, the report points out that it is critically important that countries that are financially that have are more financial largesse are able to support the countries that are less financially viable in the areas of transfer of green technologies, so that the technologies that are more advanced and more expensive can be purchased by countries that have least developed countries that require them in order to protect the environment. When one thinks about technology policies in developing countries, or in more generally in all countries, one has to think that technology policies should not be operating in isolation. The first point this report makes is that technology policies, in order to achieve the objectives of inclusive and sustainable industrialization through technological change, one has to think along a number of lines. First, one needs technology policies proper. Those are technology policies that are aimed at changing the production processes or at generating new industries. But one also must think in terms of policies that are helpful to innovation, but are not exclusively focused on technological change. For example, in the promotion of entrepreneurship. So there is an area of technology policy proper. There's an area of innovation policies related to technological change that always help the achievement of the objectives of inclusive and sustainable industrialization. But there's a third dimension of policy that has to be brought. There's always the area of, for example, competitiveness, or more policies related to the economic environment, like exchange rates, macroeconomic policies, etc., that have also to be lined up and in line with the technology and the non-technological innovation policies. And finally, one has to take into account also the complementary policies, policies that are focused on, for example, on helping, supporting the transfer of resources from one sector to another one, or transfer of workers from one sector to another one, training policies, educational policies, temporary support policies for shifting economic activities. These kinds of social complementary policies that are always necessary when economies are going very rapidly and or not growing so rapidly and require people to be shifted from one sector to another one are always necessary. To wind up this point, in order to achieve the objectives desired of an inclusive and sustainable industrial development, it is always necessary to have a combination of technology policies proper, innovation policies related to technology, more macro policies or complementary policies around the technology policies, and finally a set of complementary policies, social policies, to compensate for disruptions that may emerge. And the second and last point about policies that the report brings has to do with the fact that there's no single policy applicable to any individual country. The first one has to adapt those policies that one is going to implement to the level of development of the country state. Policies, technology policies for least developed countries are different from technology policies for middle-income countries, which are in turn different from policies for developed countries. One has to be aware that the objectives and the instruments that are going to be used at different levels of development must be different. At initial levels of development, the focus is more on the importing and adaptation of technology. At middle income levels, the focus should be more on complementing imported technology with local technology. And only at advanced levels of development one can think of developing one's own technology.